right. So today we are here with Joshua Barber, who is a corrections officer in Tennessee. And we're bypassing any agency specific names because we don't want to throw those things out there. But you have been doing the job for quite a while, and you have an interesting story of your career and how you're developing as an officer and as a person. And so we connected in several of our classes. I think we first met when we took our defensive tactics instructor course, and then we're able to reconnect when you took our de-escalation instructor course, and just had a great time getting to know you. You're super valuable for both of those classes. The perspective that you brought to the game was just awesome. And so I'm really glad you're taking some time with me, and we can kind of talk about what led you to this spot. So thank you so much, man.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad to do this.
That's awesome. So tell me, how many years have you been doing the corrections job?
So I got started whenever I was 18 back in 2002. Kid fresh out of high school, trying to figure out what career path I was going to go in. I kind of lost my job with the state. Whole wild ride that was. And then I started back with the sheriff's department I'm with now back in 2011. So I'm just really got into starting my 14th year here. So altogether, about 19 years.
Holy smokes, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So you did some work with the state, huh? I didn't not know that about you. That's awesome.
Yeah, my dad, he is now retired. He's been retired, I believe it'll be 10 years in October, with about 33 years in working TDOC. And
wow.
So that's kind of why I kind of rolled with it. Whenever I was a young kid, I was probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. There's an old state prison. It's called, I think it's just Tennessee State Prison. It's nicknamed The Walls. There were several movies that were filmed there, like The Castle, The Green Mile, places like that. So going to that prison was like my first experience. He had accidentally taken some keys home and had to take them back, and I had to ride with him. And I remember walking into the front doors of this ginormous place. It looks like a giant castle. I walk in, and of course, Dad been there a while, so he knows the guys working the checkpoint, and so he had them pull me to the side and search me and pat me down. And so it was this cool experience right off the front end. And I say at that moment, whether I knew it or not, I was intrigued from then.
Wow. How old were you then?
I was about 6, 7 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. Oftentimes we get people that's saying that, corrections kind of found them, they were looking at something in law enforcement and the road wasn't the right fit. And so they found, corrections. But it sounds like this is something that you are bred into almost. And having your father on for 30 plus years, that's an incredible amount of commitment to the profession.
Yeah, and I tell people that quite often. Typically the job does choose you because it does take certain individuals to do what we do every day. And teaching a bunch of new hires that come in, no knowledge, no experience, part of that, first day orientation, we talk about how the job isn't for everybody. You may get in, be working there 6 months and be like, okay, look, this is way more than what I expected. I'm out. The bad part about corrections to me is there's no good light on corrections. You watch movies and TV shows, and corrections always portrayed as the bad guy. I'm like, I try to sit and think about a movie or a TV show where corrections, the officers working there are good people, but typically it's not. We're all portrayed as bad folks. And I'm like, that's kind of that thing that we need to work at and change. And because the public, that's the way they view us. Until you get into the job, most people don't know anything about what we do in corrections. Until you walk those doors and you start walking in our footsteps, understanding that what the job really is, most people have no clue.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that perception that stems from media is really the only access that people have, right? Because unless we're putting it out there as a corrections organization, people don't see body cam footage. People don't see facility footage. They don't see any of the good work that we do because it's only typically comes out when something bad happens, right? And
Absolutely.
that's not helpful.
No.
But you met Ian, and
Yeah.
Ian Edwards of Chisel and Stone, an amazing person. He's been on our podcast several times. One of the things that he says is he tries to challenge people to name just one media venue, whether it be movies, TV show, whatever, that shows corrections in a positive light.
Yep.
And people cannot. I mean, I can think of one kinda, and that you mentioned it already, Green Mile. But
Yep.
most of the time, most of the characters in that movie were not in a positive light. There was just one perspective, and it still didn't go great,
No.
So you're absolutely right in that, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we do this podcast, is because my hope is that we can show the type of people that do the job, put the boots on the ground, and have an opportunity to work with people in custody and just really highlight a lot of the good work that we do. So that's such a good point. So you found out that, hey, corrections is interesting at a very early age. I bet your dad had a lot of amazing stories growing up.
Yes.
And so at what point did you join the field?
So I graduated high school and I was working at this factory and got laid off. And I'm don't know what direction to go in. I looked at going to another factory, and my dad's like, "Look, you got to get a job." He was like, "I can tell you a place that's always hiring." And I was like, "All right, why not?" So I graduated high school in May, and I got hired on for TDOC in late September of that same year. So, 18-year-old kid, lost as anybody, come wandering my way into this prison, this whole new world, and man, been stuck ever since. I was out of the career field for I want to say about 2.5 years, and the whole time I was out, it was just that want to get back in. And
Mm,
to me, it's kind of like a split thing. There's that camaraderie amongst the people that you work with, that family oriented feeling that we have from going into that place and dealing with what we deal with on a daily basis, having to 100% trust the men and women you work with, and you get really close to those people. And then the other side is actually doing good for the incarcerated, you know, talking to them, giving them some advice, some wisdom. Even people at a young age have got good advice and good wisdom, helping them realize, hey, there is a better way. And then whenever you have those conversations with those folks, you run into them back out in public and in the society, and they give you that handshake, they give you that hug, and they're like, dude, thank you. Thank you for talking to me and treating me like a human being, having those hard conversations. And man, I've been doing good. That part of it is so rewarding that, eh, man, there's not many better feelings than that in the world.
you're absolutely right. And when I was still doing the job, that was one of the things that was really important to me. And I think, sometimes officers can go through their whole career without feeling that feeling. because they are few and far between, right? They're few and
Yeah.
far between when you get somebody coming back and giving you the old high five. But once you have one, oh man, you would live and die to make sure you have that connection.
Yeah.
And our last episode of this podcast was with a crew that I went to a training class with called Guns and Geese. And I belong to a group called Forge Ferocity by Greg Anderson. And we all kind of get on a couple times a week to talk about, life and our progress, some entrepreneurship stuff, some training, fitness, all that stuff. But one of the biggest things that I got out of this last week, and it directly pertains to what you're talking about, is the power of being vulnerable to other people. And I think as corrections officers, a lot of times we don't want to even go there. But what I found is if we don't become vulnerable to people, we're not able to make that change, or at least inspire the change in others. And so that is always such a hard line to kind of tightrope walk with our business, because obviously the challenge is, how do I not get manipulated? Because I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But there's a fine line. And so to your point, it does take a very special kind of individual to be able to know what that line is, to be able to be, firm, fair, and consistent when you need to be, and then also have an open heart for people that are really going through it. Whether they're aggressive, violent, and having mental health issues, at the core of it, it all comes from some type of inadequacy or fear that they're just not able to navigate life very well. So I love that you counteract a lot of the hard stuff we have to do with that vulnerability. That's really cool.
Yeah, and it's a real hard thing to teach. As far as I know, there's been a lot of correctional agencies have to change their hiring age from 21 to 18 because the workforce is so hard to get people. And whenever it was proposed to me about, hey, what do you think about doing this? It's kind of hard to give that one answer of, no, we don't need these young kids in here, because I had to think back. I was that young kid. I was that 18-year-old walking in the door. So it's like, okay, I can't view it like I do now, because I can't forget when I started and where I came from. So I'm like, look, it's just like anybody else. It's that 50-50 chance. They're whether going to come in here and they're going to do the job as it's laid out, or they're not. So with the younger group, it's hard to explain to them how, you've got to ride that line to make sure that you're enforcing the rules and the policies and the procedures. But hey, it is okay to have a conversation. It is okay to talk to them. It is okay to ask them how their day is. I'm like, yeah, you're probably going to get that common answer. Well, I'm in jail. What do you think? But it still shows that you took the time to at least ask them how their day was. You're showing them the human side of yourself and not just this guy with a badge on. And so it's hard trying to tweak that a little bit with some of these newer, younger people that don't understand. Well, you said that we got to act this way, but you're also saying I can be this way. It's like, yeah, you've got to find that flow, that little niche that you can get in and kind of hang on to that. It's like, have conversation, but you don't have to get all in your personal business. I says, but talking to them about theirs, man, sometimes it's comforting. It shows that you care just a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, when you're a young corrections officer, and 18, I mean, I'll tell you, I would have been way too young to be a corrections officer at 18. I don't know that I would have the mentality that I did. I mean, and I joined up when I was 21, and I was still too young at 21, right? I saw stuff that I was like, I am not prepared for any of this, but being able to have the maturity to know when I can open up and hear their perspective, see how they're doing, genuinely care, right? Because
Yep.
if you don't do that, then it's very much a transactional type encounter versus a relationship encounter, and they get dismissed, and it's actually probably worse for that rapport building. But being able to find the line of, hey, I care, but I'm not going to share all my stuff, right? How do we do that? And I would imagine that growing up, I want to ask you, how did you, being an 18-year-old corrections officer, how does that differ from some of the folks that you're seeing? Because you're a field training officer, you see a lot of the new onboarding folks. Like, what are the differences that you're seeing?
Number one is confrontation. This younger generation, we talk through text. There's not a lot of that on the phone, having that conversation, or really face to face stuff. These younger people, it's all through text. So now they're coming into a job where 90% of the job is confronting men and women and having to have that conversation, whether it be asking them about their day or, hey, I need you to fix yourself. You're not following the rules. So that's the biggest part, is folks just aren't used to talking to people anymore. So you've got to try to build up in them that, hey, you can go in and talk to these people. You can ask them and tell them, hey, I need you to do this and that, and they're not going to eat you. They're human just like we are. They understand that there's rules to follow, and they know that sometimes they're going to be out of line, and we got to kind of check them a little bit, because us as humans, we're no different. I don't know anybody that does not go out and break some type of law every now and then. You get behind the wheel and you speed. That's breaking the law. So whenever that guy or gal gets behind you and pops on those blue lights and pulls you over, that's them checking you, saying, hey, you're speeding. I need you to fix yourself. It's no different behind the walls of a jail or prison. Whenever they're out of line, you've got to talk to them. You got to fix it. But you don't have to be aggressive when you fix it. It's about the tone that you come across. As my chief continues to tell me, it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. And that's one of those big issues, is just learning how to communicate with other people.
Yeah, you're totally right, and I think, I grew up. I'm a mid '80s kid, right?
Yep.
And so I was my early 20s when cell phones are coming out, and we're learning to text and But a lot of those really important conversations, whether it be with inmates or even just coworkers or family members or friends, of how do I hold you accountable, or how do I, like you say, check you on something, we don't get to do those, or we choose not to do those. And what ends up happening is, specifically in the inmate population, that negative energy kind of festers a little bit.
Yep.
And then out of nowhere, you become aggressive, right? As a supervisor, you've probably seen this where, hey, a fellow supervisor is letting something just boil and boil and boil. And then as an employee, you get hit with, wow, where did that even come from?
Yep.
And it's because we didn't have that conversation early on and set expectations. And when the expectations got crossed, we didn't address it right then and there. But that's a skill. I really do think it's a skill of being able to identify that and then follow through immediately.
Absolutely. And it's one of
very
those things
cool.
that takes constant work. That's one of those cool parts about corrections, is there's the constant evolution of how to change and maintain with the change of the world, the society. And you have to be willing to adapt and change working in the correction field. It's a given. And that
Yeah.
learning how to communicate with all age groups, it has become a little bit more difficult for a lot of folks to just be able to get across to these people.
You think it's become more difficult? See, I imagine as an 18-year-old walking into a prison full of people that are most likely older than you, I would imagine that is really difficult.
You know, it really wasn't. I I grew up around a lot of older people. I always fit in with people a lot older than me. That was just kind of the way I was raised. So, walking into that environment, it wasn't, yes, it was different because there again, you've got, of course, I worked at an all men's prison at the time. So, yeah, you've got a bunch of people in there for who knows what different types of charges and things. And so, no, you don't really know who it is you're technically facing or going up against. But the good part of that is that allowed me to grow into the officer that I am now. I yeah, 18, you think you're grown, right? As soon as you're 18, you graduated from high school, I'm grown. But you're not. You still got all this growing to do. And for me, I got to grow up working in a prison. And the life lessons that I learned from that, I wouldn't take back for anything in this world. Because there again, those things help me progress and to understand what the conversation means, what all you can get accomplished through general conversation.
Is that the biggest lesson you learned early on in your career? Or if not, what do you think is?
Learning self-control, self-discipline, those were two of the big ones. Because there again, I'm 18, I'm a kid. So, you're in one of these housing units with 15 to 100 inmates, and they're doing something that they probably shouldn't be doing, but that kid side of you think it's funny. So, you just kind of laugh and go with the flow of things, and until the boss walks in, like, what the heck's going on in here? And you're like, oh, they're not supposed to be doing that. So so then you had to learn, okay, I have to be able to hold myself accountable so I can hold all of these guys accountable to make sure we're doing the right thing. So then you have to become really disciplined in yourself, even though you may think a rule or a policy doesn't make any sense. It's not my place to say that. My place is to enforce and uphold those things. So you really have to learn how to maintain your own control and to maintain that self-discipline to, hey, look, you're in here with a bunch of convicted individuals who don't really care to follow the rules. I have to hold that standard, and I have to show them that, hey, this is the way you're supposed to be. This is the way you're supposed to act. You've got to follow the rules, whether you like it or not. This is what we all have to do. So you have to hold yourself to that standard to give them something to follow, to understand that, hey, and especially as a young guy, hey, if this young guy can come in here and hold himself to a higher standard, why can't I? So you end up becoming somebody that they like to talk to, like to sit down with. There's a friend of mine. I've been friends with him now for probably 15, 16 years. Um, he was an ex-inmate of mine. And man, every day whenever I come into work, we would sit down and we would have a conversation about life in general. And
Wow.
through our conversations back and forth, he really wasn't that bad of a dude, just got caught up in some bad things. And after he got out of prison, you know, just like most of the other ones, they disappeared. Most of these guys and gals you never really see again. Out of the blue, I got a phone call from this guy. He had tracked me down through my brother who worked at the same sheriff's department that I do and found a way to get back in contact with me just to have that conversation and, hey, thanks. And
Wow.
I probably talk to this guy a couple times a month, just to check in, you know, been around his wife, his daughter, and, kind of make me a part of the family. And it's those things that I can see and I know people can change and do the right thing as long as they're led, so to speak, in the right direction by us. And that's corrections everywhere.
Man, that's so powerful. There's such a chunk to unpack there because I think you hit the nail on the head. They People will never follow somebody who's not willing to do the same thing, right?
Yep.
And that's true of inmates not following the rules for corrections officers who aren't following the rules, but it's also true of employees and subordinates, right?
Yep.
Nothing is worse ever if you have a boss that is telling you to do something when they're totally not doing that thing. It is awful. You tear down trust that way. And I've seen that too. And, but the reverse of that is if you have within your structure, your command structure of people, hey, this is how we do things here. Watch me do what I do. And they actually follow through on that. Then your COs are going to come down and they're going to talk to your inmates that same way. Hey, watch me. This is how we do stuff. And that alignment is just so critical for any organization, but really in a correctional organization, because the consequences are so much worse because you're having riots and fights and all kinds of stuff. You're not getting my food. I don't need my tray. I need that, whatever. It can be really, really bad. And so I love that you pointed that out. And in so many instances, it's something where it has to be a personal choice to become disciplined and follow those rules, right? Because if your leadership is not doing that, and across the board, we have some pretty solid leaders in corrections, but if your leadership is not doing that, the buck stops with you. Yep. And we really want to empower our COs, no matter what rank you have, no matter what stripes are on your shoulder. Take that ownership and take that discipline and go with it, because it really, truly does make a difference.
Yeah, it does. Big time.
So your brother also works for the sheriff's office, which is crazy. That's awesome. It's a family affair, it looks like.
He did. He actually resigned. It's probably been, I'd say 6-7 years ago, because he's also in the military as well. So wow. He ended up leaving us to take on a full-time role for the National Guard unit as a instructor.
Wow. In what discipline?
I know, of course, he's changed different things several times over the last couple of years, and the last time that I'd heard from him was he does a lot of defensive tactics and I want to say marksmanship and things of that nature is kind of his big wheelhouse.
That's awesome. I bet that was a big loss for the agency when he shifted out of there.
Oh, it was. I know whenever he'd already been working there for a few years before I'd started, and so coming in, one of the first DT classes they send me to is SSGT class, which is a phenomenal class, and he was one of the instructors. So he's showing us, they're all going through showing you all the tactics and things, and then it comes back to that moment where you got to do the teach back. So we do the teach back, and then you engage in a more realistic scenario. So I go out on the mat, and of course, my brother chooses me. We get down on the ground, and he grabs a hold of me and puts me in this chokehold, and he kind of whispered in my ear. He was like, "All right, let me see you get out of this one." And so it was kind of like that, being kids again, able to get down on the ground, fight and wrestle with your brother a little bit. So that was a cool, fun moment for both of us, and I do miss him being at the department. But the role that he's taken on is much greater, much larger, and he's continuing to be successful at that as well.
That is awesome. And I know, just because I know you, that's obviously a discipline that you love to work within as well. And we'll definitely talk about that. But being able to shift out of your current role and still maintain doing the stuff that you love, that is great. And he's out there still serving his community, serving his country. So very cool. Shout out to your brother. So,
Thank you.
yeah. So going back, you do some time at the prison, you make the shift out of there, and you go into the private sector, right? And so what drew you back into the corrections world?
Man, I really missed everything about the job, man. I really did. People talk about, corrections as that stepping stone into patrol and further. And, they talk about all the cool high speed stuff you do out on patrol and things. And I'm like, I've been asked several times throughout my career being back at the sheriff's department to move out to the patrol. And I'm like, yeah, y'all may do some cool high speed stuff out there, and it's great. I said, but at the same time, I see so much from my side of law enforcement that you guys don't.
Yeah.
Whenever these men and women come into jail, they're at the bottom. They've really hit the bottom. They're more willing to listen, talk, communicate, actually look at ways to better yourself. We talk about that we have a captive audience 24/7. Out on patrol, you pull that person over or you go into that house for whatever the call is, and people are telling you right then in that moment they will do anything and everything to not go to jail. I'll change. I'll go get all the help I want. Just please don't take me to jail. Give me this one more chance. Well, by the time you get to jail, your chances are done. So it's like, okay,
Right. That ship has sailed.
yeah. So at this point, it's like, okay, I'm listening. What can I do to better myself? And so to me, working in corrections gives us that larger platform to sit down with these men and women and to have these conversations with them and to hope that something you've said sticks. And they decide to make that change for the betterment of themselves. And you have to change for yourself first and foremost. But a great majority of these people, they've got kids and things, and it's you start talking to them about, look, do you want your children to follow in your footsteps? Because a lot of the conversations you have, you find out what type of background that they've had. And a big majority is, my mom, my dad, my aunt, my uncle, somebody else has pretty much been in and out of jail and prison the majority of their life. So it's like they're following that same pattern. And it's like, okay, you have the opportunity to change the pattern. And there again, it's stuff like that, having that platform to talk to folks, hoping that you can help change them. Plus, there is all the weird, wacky, crazy, stupid stuff that we see inside of the jail as well. And it's like, you can't get this entertainment anywhere else. I'm telling you, you just can't find
it. You're absolutely right, man. I just thinking back all of a sudden to all the crazy stuff I've seen. It's awesome.
It's weird how if you take that
right though.
You take
I
that
remember
brief
this
moment,
story
your
when we're
brain
talking
goes
about
there.
like talking about, yeah, for sure. I remember talking about going back to talking about people's family and how similar we are. I remember fingerprinting this one guy, and he had come in from like a shoplift. You can kind of tell that he was like super downtrodden, not, probably transient, and just really down on his luck. And I remember fingerprinting this guy, and we always I always like to talk to people while I'm doing those tasks, because if they're talking to me, they're not thinking about fighting me. Like that's
Yep.
kind of a tactic. not to discount the relationship building, but it's always nice to kind of get inside their head a little bit and make sure that, hey, we're conversing. I kind of have a beat on what you're thinking right now, so I'm not going to get hurt.
Yep.
And I remember talking to this guy, and he didn't say a word to me, like at all. Like he wouldn't even look at me, just was nothing. I'm like, oh, we're going to fight. That's what's going to happen, right? And so kept fingerprinting, and I just kept lobbing ideas out there. Like, so what are you doing? You know, why are you here in town? Are you hungry? How's your family? And as soon as I said, how's your family? He stopped and he reached in his mouth and he pulled out a razor blade that he had secreted in his mouth. I missed it on the search. It was stuck way back up in his gums.
Yep.
And he's like, if you hadn't brought up my family, I was going to go back into that cell and I was going to kill myself. I'm like,
wow.
Okay, can I have that, please? I mean, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's way outside of the realm of possibilities, but there it was. And you go to think, gosh, I would imagine if I was ever in custody, family would be so important to me, and being able to make sure my kids are okay and that, you know, everything was, all of that stuff to relate us back to the people in our care. Man, we really are the same people. We really, I mean, you know, a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different viewpoints and different points where, hey, I'm willing to push this boundary, but not that one. But still, at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yep.
And that just really sticks out to me. How do we teach that to our younger cops and corrections officers that haven't had the experiences of that yet? What tactics do you use for that?
The biggest one is to show. You've got to show, because you can, you know, it's like the old saying, talk is cheap. You know, you can talk about a lot of things, but until they see what you're talking about, doesn't make sense. You know, whenever we do our new hire training, you know, typically I've got this group for 2 or 3 weeks, and you know, we talk about just a lot of the basic parts of the job, and a lot of times they're sitting there and they give you that look like, okay, I hear you, but I don't really get it. Like, I don't understand exactly what you're talking about. So
I have no reference.
Yes. So, you know, I spend a good amount of time trying to give stories. You know, I give my personal experiences, stories, good or bad. You know, I always tell my new folks, man, I'm an open book. I'm not going to hide anything from you. Full transparency. I'll tell you all the good and bad that I've done. And through a lot of those stories, it helps to start to open their minds up. Then, whenever I can pull up videos of our jail, things that are going on inside of our facility, let them see, hey, what I'm talking about, here's an occasion that just happened the other day, matches exactly what we talked about. And it helps them to start to realize that, okay, what you're talking about, you're legit with this. And to me, that's the biggest thing that helps them start to understand is the show. You can spend all day long in a classroom talking, covering PowerPoints and things, but until you actually see it, feel it, experience it, it's just words. It's just words.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all theoretical, right?
Yep.
And it's, I think because of, there's been all kinds of studies done. So, you know, there's one study that says, hey, look, there are audio, visual, and kinesthetic learners.
Yep.
And type A people typically stick to the kinesthetic learning. There's also other studies that says, no, not really. We all learn in all three of those different areas. And it's just, you know, how it applies to us. What I can say that is not scientific, but anecdotally, a lot of COs love to get their hands on stuff and start doing it, you know. And when it comes to the intellectual stuff, it comes to relating to people, when it comes to explaining processes, de-escalation, we really get the value out of teaching when we shove people into that circumstance, you know, and kind of make them work a little bit. And when I was an FTO, field training officer, man, that was one of the best parts, is being able to really make people uncomfortable, make our students uncomfortable, get them to a point where they can be uncomfortable and then still get the job accomplished, and then make them excellent at that, right?
Yes.
And it's just that building process. So very cool. What, you have been an FTO for a while though, right?
Yeah. So before I got moved to training, I've been in the training side of things for, I want to say, like 3.5 years now. But before I got pulled over on shift, the corporals were typically your FTOs on shift. So
Mm.
I had a lot of that duty to do. Was every time we had new ones come in, they got put with me for a couple weeks to kind of show them the ropes, get their feet wet a little bit, and then be able to kind of turn them loose. And uh, being able to watch your new hire grow, that was kind of that exclamation point on to being an FTO on shift. You take them out and you start showing them how the job goes. You show them for a week or two, and then you kind of step back and you send them to go do it, and then you watch them excel. And that's that payback in that role.
Yeah.
My fiance, she was one of my, before we got engaged, she was one of the first FTOs. Whenever I took over the training role, and I had to make some changes, and I'm like, look, you can't have supervisors training on shift. I'm like, it just don't work out. Your sergeants are trying to keep everything under control. Your corporals are running around trying to fill in all the gaps, and that new hire is missing out on some things. I said, so we need FTOs on every shift. That's their job. And so she was one of the first ones that we created there, and she was very hesitant about taking the position. She was like, I can't teach people. I just can't do it. I'm like, yeah, you can. Like, you know the job. I'm like, so if you know the job, now you just got to slow down long enough to show somebody. So she took off with it, did a great job, and that was her thing, was the satisfaction of watching that person that you bring in as a brand new deputy, train them up, send them out in the field, and then watch them progress. You know, watching that new person that you trained do such a good job that now they're up for that promotion. And then they go to that next promotion. And then whenever they finally hit their ultimate goal of whether, making that top out role on shift, or moving out of the jail, going to be a court bailiff, or going to patrol, and watching them achieve those goals, it's like, hey, I had a hand in that. I helped create this officer that we have, that everybody thinks so much of, to promote into these higher positions, and to watch them continue on their journey wherever it is they want to go. And that's what makes training so awesome. You know, being able to take the time to really open yourself up, because you have to. You have to open yourself up to your new hires. You
Gotta
have
be
to.
vulnerable.
Yes, they need to know that, hey, I made mistakes too. You're going to make mistakes, and hey, let me tell you about some of my mistakes. It's okay. You're going to learn from it. It's going to make you a better officer, a better deputy. It's okay. And to let them start to feel home. You
Yeah.
know, you're spending 8, 10, 12 hours a day inside of these facilities. You've got to feel at home, not comfortable, but at home. This is this is my place. I am able to make decisions on my own, and I can control things, and I can be a little vulnerable too. One of the most powerful things that has always been beneficial to me in dealing with, especially these new arrestees that come in, and maybe they're drunk, or maybe they was involved in a bad domestic, or typically a lot of these things surround like mental health. And whenever you take the time to be like, hey, look, I was there once. Like I struggled with mental health and you know, these are some things that I did to make myself better and to work through. That way they can see that there is a brighter side to where they're at. It's that vulnerability on every level, whether it be with your deputies, with the ones incarcerated. It doesn't matter. You have to let them see the human side of you. Because, and I'll say this: a lot of times the new guys come in, and I'm the first bright smiling face they see, and a lot of times I've had several say they felt intimidated by my appearance and the way that I sound sometimes. And so whenever they're new, you don't know nobody, you're closed off. And whenever you're closed off, you're not going to learn. So uh, that first opening introduction is where I try to break down that barrier. It's like, all right, first and foremost, I tell them who I am, what I've done in my career. And I'm like, well, I need to give you this little caveat. I speak redneck and a little English. So, sometimes it may be hard to understand me. And I'm not the most politically correct guy in the world. And I need you to laugh. They all kind of pause and give me that look. And there was like, you laugh. I'm like, yes, I need you to laugh. I need you to enjoy your time sitting here in this training room. Look, yeah, the job is serious. But if you don't learn to laugh, you're just going to be mad, angry, disgruntled all the time, and you are going to hate life. So a lot of times I try to get that icebreaker in there in the beginning to make them feel comfortable, to make them vulnerable to where they'll open up to me. And usually it helps the training game on both sides.
That is so profound, and it's so lost most of the time. I mean, I've trained with a lot of people over the years, and I've took training from a lot of people over the years that didn't get that, right? They train from a position of, hey, I'm the one in charge and I should be here. And if you're not up to my standard, well, then you're not worth my time. And that is just a horrible way to learn because it doesn't breed safety. What we have found, and we hit this a lot in our de-escalation for corrections classes, if we do not create a sense of safety, no growth happens.
Correct.
But safety is not synonymous with comfort. Those are two very different things. I can feel 100% safe while being also incredibly uncomfortable doing the thing that I'm doing. And what you're talking about here is letting those barriers come down just enough where the information will come in while also maintaining the importance of the job. One of the things that I said early on was that I take our job very seriously, but I don't take myself very seriously. We joke around a lot. You've been to our classes. We joke around way too much, and it's awesome. We have a great vibe. But when it comes down to do business, we are on point. And that is one of the things I think sets ArcTactical aside from a lot of the different classes that are there. And so I love that you're saying that because the training aspect is so important. And we had Sydney Shoemake on a couple of episodes ago talking about her training experience. And, around the country, people have onboarding experiences just way, way different. Here in Washington, Ian and I, again, we developed a 10-week corrections academy here for the state of Washington, which is still being used today. It's 10 weeks. And then typically people will leave that and then they'll go to their agencies and have, I don't know, 10 more weeks, 3 months, something like that, of field training. And the idea of how do we build a solid foundation for our CEOs to be able to leap off of and be successful. And then there's some agencies that said, no, look, we'll give you 2 weeks of really hardcore instruction, but the rest of your development comes from doing the job. And I kind of like that approach as well. But if you don't have the right person in those roles, that whole thing kind of fails and it kind of
Yes.
crumbles. And so it sounds like you are really setting the tone for what that needs to be. And man, I wish more people would do what you're doing at your agency. That is amazing.
Yeah, because whenever I took training over, our new hire training was awful. We bring this
Mm-hmm.
new guy in. The training officer for the facility was also the security officer for the facility, so he's trying to do double the work. So you take the new guy, you set him in this room, and you start handing him the binders. The binders full of all the policy and procedure. And he would be like, all right, start with this. I'll catch you in a day or so. And it's like, what? it, and you go by and you check on this new guy, and they're completely lost. They're like, I'm trying to read through all this stuff. And man, we all know how awful it is to just sit for hours reading nothing but policy and procedure, and you go mind numb. And it's like, I was surprised to see the person come back the next day. So
Well, a
they
lot of it is they don't have a lot of context for what they're reading either, right? It goes
no,
back to that application piece.
yeah. So then they would come back the second day. They would finish up. Uh, the trainer would take them back, show them some really limited DT stuff, go through and sometimes not even that day, but they would try to fit in some OC taser things, and then boom, hey, you're with this corporal for the next 2 weeks. And now they're trying to run around and keep up with the corporal who's running around the jail trying to fill in all the gaps that the jail needs done. And then, hey, you're on shift on your own. Good luck. And it was like, no,
Yeah.
we're doing this completely wrong. I'm like, we need a couple weeks to sit down with these people and to really lay that foundation. Hey, these are the rules and the principles that we're going to run the jail by. Then, hey, I'm going to send you with somebody that is going to show you the job the correct way to do it for a couple weeks. Then they're going to sit back. They're going to watch you do the job for a week or so. And as long as everything meshes, then hey, we're gonna take this cloud away from you and let you start doing things by yourself. But if you got questions, stop and ask somebody. Like, we're here to help you. We don't want you to fail. And it's making them feel, as you said, safe to be able to do all that stuff to where they can open up and actually learn the job the right way.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we were having this conversation a couple weeks back in a class that we were doing. And what's so interesting is that as a community in a profession, we spend an awful lot of time training people, building them up to a level of competence, right? We have to push people to a level of competence. And as soon as they reach that level, most of the time training stops.
Yes.
And they fall back to the level of comfort.
Yep.
All while the meantime, our communities expect a level of excellence. Anytime something doesn't go perfect in a jail setting and it hits the news, what do we look at? Oh man, they didn't do this, and this right. But we have not put the time in to getting them there. And that so often gets lost, man. And not making excuses for some of the poor behavior that some of our COs have done across the country, because those exist too.
Yep.
But most of the time, it's just unrealistic expectations for the amount of investment that we're putting into our people. But I think your approach of continuing almost a mentorship as they go through, that is really a great solution for that problem, because we're not making more training time. Typically that doesn't happen and nobody's fully staffed anymore. So how do we maximize that equation? Well, we continue that investment by building that culture within our agencies.
Yeah, that's the only way to get them through, because man, I can remember whenever I started at the sheriff's department, my training was less than that. It was, hey, you're going to be down here with these guys, just follow them around, you'll pick it up. And that was it. That was all the training I had until, I was there a couple months and, got sent to, basic class through Tennessee Corrections Institute and things of that nature. And was able to take some SSGT classes. By this point, I'm done 6 months in and still haven't really felt like I was trained in any area. It was, hey, I hope you've got good common sense and you can figure this thing out on your own because that's all we got.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm sure there's so many different stories out there. I can tell you that I remember I was going through our academy, and at the time we had a 4-week academy. And when I was about halfway through, I hadn't gone through our field training process yet. I went into the academy, and on one of the weekends, my commander, who's no longer at that agency, calls and said, hey, I need to call you in and work night shift the next 2 nights because we're out of staff. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'd be by myself. And I ended up doing it. Like I figured it out and I survived.
Right.
But to talk about setting people up for failure, and not even to mention lawsuits when it comes to failure to train lawsuits. I mean, holy smokes. But that's just par for the course because I think a lot of our administrations are doing the best with what they got and trying to make ends meet. So I get that side of it too. So you go back to county corrections, you make a name for yourself. What is driving you now? Like what inspires you to do what you're doing now? And are you mainly focused on training or what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean my main focus is still training and trying to make sure I give the most meaningful training. It's like there's 101 things that we want to train on, but you don't have time, you don't have staffing, you can't pull all these people away from shift to bring them in all the time to do training. So it's like, okay, how can I bundle some of these things together and make it meaningful? We get, I finally got our administration to allow me to go from 24 hours of in-service training to 40 hours. I'm like, look, I'm barely covering anything in 24 hours. Like I need more. So we bumped it up to 40 hours and it's like, okay, now what can I put together to cover what the state mandates that I've got to train on? And then that leaves me a little bit of time to give them something meaningful. I think every place has those same mundane classes that we have to teach every year, whether you like it or not. And it's like, okay, guys, look, the first couple of days of this, it's not going to be the greatest. All right. It's probably going to be a little dry, a little boring, but hey, we're going to make the best of it we can. Let's get through these. So now we can get into some more of the hands-on, the more talking. Hey, I'm going to start a conversation and let's see where it goes. Let's see how much conversation we can create so I don't have to do death by PowerPoint for the next 2 or 3 days.
Right.
And hope that we cover all the categories we need to cover through some open conversation. And then, of course, you've always got those guys that are just geared up. When are we hitting the mat? And it's like, hey, we're going to get there. I know it's important. I know it's fun, but we've got to cover these things first. And so it's trying to come up with meaningful training, things that the way I look at it, if it hits home with me, it's probably going to hit home with a lot of these guys. And a lot of times it's a lot of crucial conversations. People think that training is always, it has to be just PowerPoint after PowerPoint. And I get, whenever you're trying to mass train, PowerPoint is the best way to go. But it's like, okay, can I put stuff in this PowerPoint slide that is going to make people think? I got to unlock the mind because being in corrections, you can't have a closed mind. You've got to be able to constantly be thinking about anything and everything, all the crazy situations that can possibly pop off, And I'm like, look, you're not going to be prepared for all these things. But if you've at least thought about, well, what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? What might I do to correct, fix, solve, resolve? I don't know, but at least I've got an idea. It may not work. I may go in
Got
with
to
this
rep.
game plan, but that game plan may fail. And so that's a lot of what I try to open up in training is to unlock the mind and to get people to just think for a minute.
Well, a lot of those neural pathways don't get created until they think of stuff themselves, right? And um, you've been to our de-escalation for corrections instructor course. That instructor piece, in my opinion, is one of probably the best instructional pieces out there, because when we look at we do have a PowerPoint that comes with it,
Yep.
but there's nothing of value on there. And the
No.
reason why, like, we can put a picture of a shopping cart on there and talk about that for 2 hours, and
Yeah.
it's all really meaningful stuff, because instructors that rely on their PowerPoints and just essentially read off of it, regurgitate it, it bounces right off their student's head and nothing penetrates, right? So that is such a crucial piece. And the PowerPoints, though, you know, they're actually horrible for learning. They're
They are.
great for documentation, but they're horrible for learning. And so being able to actually have the information and connect with people like you're talking, have that conversation that's actually meaningful, that is how we get retention. And that's really what's most important, right? We're not training to check boxes. We're training because when the devil comes knocking at their door, they need to have something to recall, be able to put into practice immediately and automatically without having to think about it. And so I love that you're taking that approach. That is awesome.
Yeah, that's the only way I know to do it is I call it winging it. I'm really good at winging stuff, right? So my PowerPoints, to me, I use them as a guide, to
Yeah.
keep me on track, because a lot of times these conversations you can get way off in the weeds, and then you got to try to round yourself back into where the conversation initially started. And that's what I use the PowerPoints for, but it allows me to think. Like as I'm covering the slide, whatever it is, I'm thinking about a situation, a scenario, something that I dealt with, I saw, I was a part of. There again, to give that example of what we're teaching. And I know sometimes I may tell the same story twice, but I probably tell it a little bit differently each time. And a lot of that has to do with the class. How engaged are they? How many questions are they really asking? And a lot of times their questions help open my mind to where it helps me recall things of the past that I can bring back forward and to help teach. And that's that's that part for me that gets fun, is me thinking outside of the box every day. It's each new class, it gives me an opportunity to think of a new scenario, a new problem that needs to be solved, throw it at them, let them throw some ideas at the wall, and kind of see what sticks. And man, I'll be honest, some of these guys have taught me a few things, or different ways to come at a situation that maybe I hadn't really thought of. So then all that does is up my training game for that next group that comes in. It's like, hey, last group we done this, it worked for them. Let's give it a shot. And so that's that constant evolution of training. Is us as trainers, we have to be open to new things, new ideas, different ways to get stuff done. It's like whenever I've came to the defensive tactics class that y'all put on, one of the big things that I learned from you guys was this is a way. It's not the way, it's a way. There's, as my dad told me, growing up as a kid, he always said there was more than one way to skin a cat. I never really understood what he was getting at there, and probably until I got into training and realized, there are multiple ways to solve a problem. Which one works best for you?
Well, you're absolutely right, because what I found, especially in like new hire classes, everybody's going to come to that class with a different perspective. And
Yeah.
so if you try to just cookie cutter your way through that, a lot of times you are going to miss the mark for a lot of your people, right? And so being able to, we call it pivoting, going into a class, getting the vibe, seeing their expertise level, seeing their engagement level, and taking that information, and like you said, we're going to wing it. But it's
Yep.
not really winging it, because we always have that destination where they need to get to. We just have to figure out how to get them there. And that is the sign of a great instructor, being able to find that pivot and then work through it. That honestly keeps things a little bit more exciting for the instructor too.
Oh, it
So
does.
that's really cool. That's really cool. One thing that I was thinking about is, remind me, you're in a lot of different disciplines when it comes to instructorship. So you're the DT guy, you're defensive tactics guy. What other stuff do you do?
So I do defensive tactics. I do our taser. I do our OC, and then um, I cover all the basics of the job. We day one, especially for like my new hires, it's just a orientation kind of meet and greet type thing. And then day two is, we cover ethics and the department's code of ethics and things like that to really get them to understand, hey, I don't know really how you were before you started this job, but if you have any biases or anything like that, like you got to let those things go. Like this is what the department expects of you. Usually on that second day of that conversation, I can find out from the majority, okay, who really wants to hang in here and do this. Then we go into day two, and it's that next gut punch. Here's the constitutional rights laws that we have to abide by. Now I told you how you got to act as far as a human goes, but now let me tell you how you got to treat these people on top of how you're supposed to act. And then that kind of starts that ball rolling into, you know, this is how head count's supposed to go, and this is what you're supposed to do for security checks, and then we really get into the nuts and bolts of the job. And so those are the main things that I cover. Um, we hit use of force really heavy because there again, that's the number one cause of law enforcement to get in some heat is bad uses of force and things. Then with use of force, I always try to, and I probably maybe I don't. Sometimes people say I over sprinkle the de-escalation, but as times have changed, look back whenever I got started in corrections, de-escalation was very minimal. It was 100% ask, tell, make, and that's it. As my career has gone on, there's more of that ask, ask again. Okay, well maybe I didn't ask it the right way the first two times, so let me talk a little bit more, and then we get into the making part. So I've
Yeah.
tried to make sure that folks understand the power of de-escalation because it really is. It's a powerful tool if you know how to do it. Then we go
Yeah.
into the rest of the use of force, the hardware parts, the OC, the taser weapons, batons, things of that nature. Um, so literally, I'm trying to cover in about 3 weeks everything that they really need to know about getting into the job. And then a lot of the in-service stuff is it's kind of reflection on some of those things. Each year, put a piece in, take a piece out. Um, we try to talk to folks about emotional intelligence. Um, we try to make sure that we cover some type of wellness, which is going to be one of our big things next year is officer wellness, TCI. That's one of the things they're pushing this year is officer wellness. Um, because I don't ever want the officer to think that training is just about the incarcerated, the inmates. We forget us in this whole flow of things. It's everything is driven about the inmate. And it's like, okay, yeah, we've got to do a lot of training to make sure that we're treating them right and we're not violating their rights and all this stuff. But what about you? How are you doing? Are you taking care of yourself? And so I try to make sure that I engage in that as well, and to make the staff feel that they're not left out of the mix, because we all know that corrections gets left out a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't want our guys and gals to ever forget how important they are, what their roles are, and to keep them driven and motivated to come back every day to perform that service to your best.
It's kind of cliche, but I really do like the analogy of the airplane oxygen mask, right? We are not able to take care of other people until we can take care of ourselves.
That's correct.
And we do not, outside of patrol, right? I mean, because they have a very dangerous job, but they also have a lot of downtime when they're driving to calls and
Yeah.
doing car to cars and not under the gun. In corrections, we have those inmates' eyes on us all the time.
Yeah.
And we're constantly trying to be manipulated. We're constantly trying to be under scrutiny and challenged and all of those things. And wellness for corrections is something that often gets overlooked because I don't know why. It doesn't make sense why, because all the evidence shows that not only do we have a lot higher pressure job, but when we get out of the job, we end up dying or committing suicide a lot faster right out of the gate.
Yes.
And we need to take care of our COs, not just because it's good for our COs and employee retention and all of that stuff, workers' comp costs down, all that. But again, we cannot do the job that we need to do for our inmates without taking care of our COs. We just can't. That math does not work out. And
No, it
so
doesn't.
by investing into our people that way, man, that is very profound. And thank you for doing the work that you do there, man. That's awesome.
Like I said, I love my job. I love corrections. I never saw myself as a trainer. I was always that guy on the floor. I was that dependable guy. You need something done. Hey, run and go do this and get this done. And so I never saw myself in this training role. I never thought I'd enjoy teaching as much as I do. But it allows me to remember where I came from all the time.
Mm.
They typically talk about, as you move up in the ranks and you move over to the administration side, those guys they forget where they came from. Well, I use that training as that platform to remind myself where I came from through my stories and telling all my ups and downs. It keeps me humble, and that's number one for a trainer, in my opinion, is to stay humble. Remember where you came from. You were that new guy at one point in time. So embrace it and help these new ones understand that you will make it as long as you enjoy what you're doing.
I love that, man. That's such a powerful message. And I'm sure you are setting the path for all of the new hires coming on there that want to be like you and build their own path that way. That's amazing. The last thing that I want to talk about, and it's very much a shameless plug, but we are a training company, and it's important to me because I want to get your feedback. You took 2 of our classes, and one of us is our defensive tactics instructor course, and the other one was our de-escalation for corrections course. I just want to hear from you. Tell us what ArcTactical does right in those 2 areas, and what we can do to keep on doing those things right for our corrections officers.
So the DT class I thoroughly enjoyed because of the way it was instructed. I had a few months prior, actually, I want to say it was about 3 months before I took y'all's class, I had taken another company's DT class. coming into training, I didn't have any certifications. So it's like, okay, I need to get some certifications going to cover liability issues. So I jumped into this class, and don't get me wrong, it was a good class, but the way it was instructed, I struggled to pick it up a little bit.
Hmm.
So whenever I came and took you guys' class, I don't know, it was the way that it was broke down, the way we went through the steps of the tactics, it helped me put it all together. Now, did it help that maybe I had been through a class, a few months prior, so some of those things were still kind of fresh on my mind? Maybe. Um, but whenever I came in and took that, you guys, y'all didn't act like you were better than, and that's a
Hmm.
big thing for me. I felt like I was able to connect with y'all where I couldn't connect with some of the other instructors I'd had, and that's a big thing for me. You're coming in, you're taking a DT class. It's going to be rough. You're going to get dinged up and banged around a little bit. The instructor's probably going to get his hands on you at some point in time. You're going to be that guy, and and being able to go out and feel comfortable with the instructor, it helped me take it in. And I'd actually sent my assistant to one of y'all's classes earlier this year, and he came back and he kind of felt the same way. He was like, look, I wasn't intimidated as badly as I thought I was going to be from the class. So that tells me it wasn't just a me experience; it was him the same way.
Yeah.
And the de-escalation class, Ian done a fantastic job setting the mood, setting the tone. The way that he explained that class to me, it even though I teach and talk about de-escalation, it give me a different viewpoint on how to present it, because you can't just pull people in and be like, all right, hey guys, you need to learn to de-escalate stuff. You need to learn how to wordsmith a little bit, talk stuff down. Let's move on. There's a little bit more to it than that. And
Yes, sir.
being able to learn what I did from that class, especially, I guess one of the biggest takeaways I had was the way that your brain actually processes through things. You know, knowing that your brain processes stuff is one thing, but knowing how it processes your thinking and your logic and what your body's going to initially resort back to whenever, pretty much all hell hits. That was my biggest takeaway, because I was able to explain that back to my staff, and they were able to get it. it it's like, okay, I know you tell us that we need to de-escalate, but man, sometimes you just can't. Like, you're in the heat of the moment, and man, how do I make my brain stop? And it's like, no, you can't make your brain stop. It's what you already have in your brain. That's what you've got to pull from. That's what you got to resort back to. So if only thing you have in your brain is, oh my goodness, this is a violent offender, which am I going for, spray or tase? Then your mind isn't in the right place. Find what the root cause of the problem is. Ask questions. I'm like, now look, you're going to get that person that is mentally thrown off, and you can't reason with them whatsoever. Drugs, alcohol, those things like that have kicked in. Reason is out the window. Now you've got to come at it at a different angle, but still, force should not be on the forefront of your mind. How can I slow this person down? Their mental thinking. Find some simple things to talk about, which again was part of that class. Was, you go to, I believe it was the island. Whenever we was talking about, putting them on an island to where you can reduce their thinking down to simple things. Hey, do you know what time it is? Do you know what year it is? What month it is? try to get their mind to slow down to simple thought process instead of you've got this intoxicated guy standing here, probably don't even know how he got to where he's at right now or even where he is. And there's 3, 4 of you officers standing around him and he's freaked out. He's panicked. We've got to slow that brain down for him. So that was some of the good parts of that de-escalation class that I took. Having that teach back moment for me, there again, I'm always trying to better my training, my presentation, and being able to do that in front of the group of people that you're in here taking a class with, being able to get that feedback that was given. It wasn't like, well, we might give you feedback, we might not. No, you're getting some feedback. You're going to get some positives. You might get a little bit of negative if you got it, but that negative is turned into another positive to make you a better instructor. And there again, I love stuff like that. I may get a little nervous still at times. I think every time I go to present anything, the first 5 minutes, that first 5 minutes up there in front of everybody, it's like, okay, get your stuff together. You're fine. Get your bearings about yourself. And then everything starts to flow. And being able to put myself kind of on that stage with that group of correctional professionals that I was in there with, there again, it made me more confident as a trainer as well because of that positive feedback. And Ian's like, hey, I'm going to give everybody some feedback when they're done. And he looked at me and he was like, yeah, I don't have any. No, I do have something. I was like, yeah, no, you told me you were giving me something. I said, so don't tell me you've got nothing. You pronounced the guy's name wrong. I was like, oh, all right, I'll take it.
That's it? That's all he had?
That was all he had for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it goes back to one of the principles that we do in our company, and that is just leveling people up. If we just stay satisfied with where we're at, then we might as well just turn in the towel, right? We always are trying to fight to be better and fight to be better. And to your point, I still get nervous every time I go get in front of a class. I still get nervous every time I put a mic on, right? And I love doing this. But if you're not getting nervous, then you don't care, really, is what it boils down to. And so that's such a profound thing. And keeping that with you, whether you're walking the floor as a new officer, whether you're engaging an employee as a supervisor, whether you're teaching, always being open-minded to get leveled up, I think is just a critical thing. And that's how we build a level of performance up in the profession. So, man, thank you so much for doing this. We are almost at an hour and a half, and we typically stick for an hour, but I think I could keep talking to you forever, man. I just really appreciate your time and your story and your commitment to the performance levels of our profession. And I just hope you keep doing what you're doing out there, brother.
Hey, man, and y'all the same. I've appreciated this. Yeah, it doesn't even seem like we've been in here for an hour and a half doing this. It's been great talking to you. Like I said, I love whenever y'all show up and do classes in the hometown or somewhere they're close to. Y'all do excellent work, and I appreciate y'all and the time and effort that y'all put into teaching us. And the other thing that y'all do great is that you're correction driven. A lot of times we go to these classes and it's an overload of patrol and these road guys, and then there's a little bit of corrections tossed in there. And that's what I love about you guys so much is y'all are staying true to the profession of corrections, and I love it.
We are very much genuine to this kind of niche job, but I think you'll agree with me. The people that you meet that are working in the walls, man, they don't come any better than that. So I appreciate you recognizing that, and we're going to continue to serve our corrections folks until we're done with this game. So I appreciate you, brother. Please be safe, and I can't wait to see you next time.
Thanks, bro.